Welcome to another episode of the Leave No Doubt podcast. Just before we get started, I'd like to thank the episode sponsors, Connection Technologies, specialists in telecom and IT services, so please do check them out. Today, I'm excited to introduce Lee Mansell, former Luton, Nuneaton, Oxford, Torquay and Bristol Rovers player with over 500 appearances, so some brilliant experience, and now player services executive at the PFA. Lee, welcome to the podcast.
Morning, Dan. Thank you. Delighted to be on here finally.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to get you, and I think myself and Joe beforehand really keen. Like, obviously, got loads of experience, loads of stuff to share with players, and especially within your role now at the PFA. Seeing, I don't say the other side of the game, but obviously how players can be supported that way.
Yeah, I mean it's been a fairly long time now, was it? It's got to be coming up to 25 years since I first started out at 16 at Luton. So there's been a lot of experiences throughout the journey, and it's still continuing at the moment with the PFA, which is good.
Yeah, and that's probably a nice place to kick off, and how your journey started out. Obviously, Luton, maybe very different Luton Town to what they are now, high flying in the Premier League. What was it like coming through at Luton? Obviously 25 years ago.
Yeah, quarter of a century. Cheers, mate. But I think Luton at that time had a real. The academy was producing some really good players that had come through the system. Even like before the likes of. I made my debut, and there was Matty Taylor, Matty Spring, Emerson Boyce, Liam George. Even before that, Paul McLaren. And there was just a plethora of names that were coming through the system. They were just kind of churning players out left, right, and centre. It was like every year, and even like probably 5 or 6 years after that, they were still producing your likes of Kev Foley and Keith Keane as well, that were coming through, Stephen O'Leary, Michael Leary. So the academy at the time was really efficient in what they were doing. The amount of players produced was just crazy. It's kind of, although they are still producing good players at the moment, I think it's where they are now in the Premier League is obviously very difficult to blood those young lads into it. But at the time, I made my debut in League One, which was, I think, in 2001, I think it was. And like I said, I think that the starting team of that day probably had 7 or 8 players that had come through that youth system, which was incredible.
What is it you think, helped them? Was it, obviously Luton being really well located close to London, you can obviously pick up a lot of players that way. What do you think it was with that academy that, helped to produce so many players at that time?
A lot of it has to go down to the staff. John Moore was huge. Paul Lowe, who's now the chief scout at Spurs. Dean Rastrick was also the community officer there, who's now the academy manager at Spurs. They were 3 really influential figures, and the coaching and the laid back nature of it, which was brilliant, because I was in Gloucester at the time. So I first got scouted by Luton when I was 11. So my journey with them really started from that. I was playing Gloucester Primary School's football, and I got scouted by Stuart White, and Stuart White took me across, played a game for him. I remember playing Watford. This was, I was so nervous afterwards. I didn't know if I was going to be kept on or not. They invited us back for more games, and in the end, I ended up doing schoolboy forms. But they were really cool with me. I very rarely trained. It was a 2.5 hour journey. It's not the 45-minute radius that you can only sign for clubs with now. So I would go up on a Sunday. Mum and Dad would take me up on a Sunday, play the games on the Sunday, and it just progressed from there. Signed schoolboy forms. Then from about 14, 15, I went up at half-term holidays. So I then was introduced to my digs lady, Harry and Liz Osborne, and I stayed throughout my journey as well through it. So there's a lot of, I got to see the same people. There wasn't a huge turnover of staff as well, so you were always comfortable with who you were with. So I mean, the grounding that I got coming through, and then obviously getting offered apprenticeship forms was brilliant. And because I've been in the building so much, and was doing the jobs of a YTS during those half-term holiday camps, was brilliant, and they were great learning tools then going forward, and it made the link from schoolboy to apprentice really seamless, and could hit the ground running straight away.
Yeah, I mean that's something I guess we've spoken about a few times. Adjusting when you've got to travel and move away, but obviously, like you're saying there, having that link and that connection, that consistent connection, obviously supported you in your journey.
Yeah, and what they allowed me to do as well, which was I feel really like, obviously I've got a young son now who plays football, but was really beneficial to me was I was still allowed to play for my local side, which was Windsor Drive in Gloucester. So if I wasn't playing for Luton on the Sunday, I was playing for Windsor, which was gave me such a good social obviously interaction with the players as well, because they were my friends growing up all through the school ages. So still being able to play for them, which was really, really good. And like I said, Luton were really cool with everything. I mean, they allowed me to go and have a trial with Man United, so I went down to Bath, went and did that. Went down to Southampton. All through that time, they were just brilliant. Just say, listen, we are really invested in it, but we want you to go and try this out, because obviously at the end of the day, it's Man United. Luton at the time were League One. So we went and had those experiences. Southampton at the time were Premier League as well. So, to be able to go and them for me out to allow me to go and do that was crazy. What you think about now, you'd never get a professional club that would allow you to, as a player at that age, go and effectively go and trial for another club free of charge. As I say, like that made the ultimate decision when they offered apprenticeship forms, because they were so really good, because they were so relaxed, because we were obviously used to going up, and I was used to being away from family. It made the decision a hell of a lot easier than go and do my apprenticeship at Luton. And plus, the turnover of players there would give me a good chance of hopefully becoming a professional.
Brilliant. And in those, in those development years when you've gone up there, what was the training like? Like how did they develop you, I guess, as a player in that
So
period?
they treated us like apprentices, which was brilliant. So obviously, because I didn't train, I just played games. Obviously, I would only train with them really when I was up doing a half-term camp. So we were made to come in at 8 o'clock, the same as the apprentices. And bearing in mind, I was probably 14, 15 at the time. So we were made to come in at 8 o'clock. Obviously, the digs lady would drop me in because I didn't know any buses. And then obviously the staff would then drop me back off. But from that moment in, as soon as you come in, you were then working. So you'd be given a player's boots, or first team player's boots. And it's quite a privilege, really. You've got to make sure they're clean. So all the jobs in the grounding started from there. It's from 14, 15, and that gave you such a high work ethic. Putting the nets out or the training cones, things that these players don't do now. These young lads coming through, we had to do that every time, every day before we left. Change rooms had to be immaculate. First team, reserve team, even our own under 18 one had to be clean as a whistle as well. So those were the standards from an early age that we were set. And like I said, I think it's pivotal. It's been pivotal for me for my journey then coming forward, because the standards I learned and the ethics then coming through, I then took throughout my journey as a pro.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. And I think it's nice to obviously with these young players, it's great when you have that work ethic and the drive and that side of the game, because I mean it obviously then transfers into your training and your playing. In those first few seasons at Oxford, obviously, like you said, making your debut. Sorry, Oxford, Luton, making your debut and coming through into the first team. How did you like? How was that transition for you? And then how did you like obviously manage to get yourself into that position? I guess.
Yeah, so when I made my debut in the FA Cup, so it was the third round away at QPR in a replay. I remember the night before. Obviously, I'd done a lot of reserve team football. I was in my second year of apprenticeship, so decisions were usually made in and around March time. I think they still are now with the current apprentices that are still going through the system. So I just got a phone call actually at the gym. We were doing a gym session and told to come back to the ground, and then told I was travelling. sometimes we would travel and then obviously put all the kit out, the kit man do the boots as part of your responsibility. So, but no, I was told I was included in the squad. I was obviously chuffed to bits and just thought, yeah, I'd probably be 18th man or whatever it was then. And I just remember him just flipping the board over and my name was there. I was starting. So I didn't have really much time to think about it. I'd done the warm up, can't remember anything about it, went straight out, and I managed to score after a minute. And I just thought to myself, and it was just a surreal feeling. It was kind of that feeling where you'd spent all those years that not just for me, but for my family as well. They were obviously all in the crowd, and get that feeling and obviously share it with them was amazing. What transpired then was that I managed to then break into the team off the back of that. I'd obviously done well enough to stay in it and played the remainder of the season that way. Then signed a 3-year contract under Joe Kinnear because we got relegated that year. There was a whole change of managers and everything. It's pretty much been my journey, to be honest with you. Loads of change of managers and ends up in a relegation. So obviously I signed a 3-year deal that summer with Joe Kinnear. Started off the season really well, done a good pre-season under my belt. And then all of a sudden I played, I think it was about 13 games and bang, I was just completely out of the team. And that was a real struggle because I'd played probably best part of 30 plus games for the first team in half a season, 3/4 of a season if you're taking on that previous season and the new season and we start off. And I just found myself completely out of the team with no rhyme or reason, or I was never pulled to one side or anything like that. And that was a real struggle. Especially for a lad that obviously I just turned 19 at the time. I thought the world was my oyster. I thought I was on the trajectory to, there was talk of big clubs coming and watching. I know Arsenal were there at one stage, Villa were there at one stage looking as well. And then all of a sudden I've gone from like that and then completely dropped down. And I spent the vast majority of that season after that then playing Wednesday football, which was Central League football. Very rarely did I get a sniff of getting back into the first team. So it was a very difficult period of time that I'd had to go through, and I think kind of made me shape and showed a little bit. I had to show a little bit of resolve to get back in. I did eventually, probably the following season after that, after a good pre-season, but found myself, I was there for 5 years and I probably only played probably about 18 months worth of football in those 5 years, which was, really difficult.
I think, there's two really important things I think to look at there. A lot of players, obviously there's that brilliant memory of making your debut and scoring the goal. But very often you see the player that might come on and, not cope with the situation or not be able to stay in the team for a period of time. Is there any advice that you could give to players, waiting to make their debut when that opportunity does come and then how they, manage to ride that wave like you did at that start there? Is there any advice you can probably provide around that?
Yeah, I think don't think too much of it. I think the very fact that I was just kind of chucked into there, I didn't have a sustained period of time to think about my debut and what it looks like. Listen, you condition from, 16 years of age when you get into and start your apprenticeship, you condition for that moment. You've kind of been working really from when you first started kicking a ball to have that. So you're conditioned into it, and and I think if you're given time to think about it, then that time could then, play an adverse effect on you. The very fact that I was chucked in, which was, I didn't have time to think about, I could just go and play. I didn't have to worry about anything. And that'd be my biggest advice to any player that's going to make their debut, or if they know, don't think too much about it. Just go and play your natural game, because at the end of the day, you're in that situation for a reason. The manager thinks highly enough of you to put you into the pitch. He trusts you to do it as well, which is a huge thing. Obviously, having been an ex-manager myself, having putting trust in young players to go in to do the job, because ultimately it's their job on the line. So they're trusting you to go and do that. So just go ahead and have fun and enjoy it, because you only do get one major debut. For me, it worked out brilliant because I scored, I played really well. And then I managed to obviously then play the remainder of that season, which was fantastic for me and earned a good contract at the end of it. But yeah, I think young players especially think once they've made their debut, they're there on pretty much what I did. You're there on the road to the Premier League and the riches that ensue. But very rarely does that actually happen. I think you've got to enjoy that moment when it happens, and I'm glad I did. And I think with the young players at this moment in time, especially now coming through, different to when 24, you've got a lot of people around you to help. When I just had a youth team manager, reserve team manager, and obviously first team manager. Now you've got player care. You've got, if you're lucky enough to be in Cat 2, Cat 1s, maybe in some Cat 3s might have it, you've got psychologists that are there to help you. So, when you do take that dip, you've got someone to go and speak to. As an 18, 19-year-old lad, I didn't have anyone. I just had family to speak to, but they didn't get it because they're not part of the environment. So, yeah, to go, obviously, I'm probably going on a little bit of a rant, but just enjoy that debut. But if you are on that downward spiral, make sure you are voicing to people. I think it's so huge and really it can be really beneficial for the player then coming up and then coming back down, because you can stay at a level. If you can stay at a level, that average level, then going through mentally, you're going to have a long and hopefully successful career.
I mean, I think that's brilliant advice. Definitely from like the psychological side of things. When you're coming in, try not to think too much about it. You're there for a reason. The man, like you say, the manager selected you. He trusted you. He's put you in, and ensure you try and enjoy it. Like everyone starts out obviously playing football, wanting to enjoy the games. Make sure you make the most out of those highs. But yeah, like you're saying, on the flip side, there, like you see it happen quite often, don't you? Like where players, go through a period where they might not be in the team for whatever reason, young players, and you can get frustrating and about actually making sure you are sharing and speaking to people and creating that, support network around you. Is anything, you touched on trust there. If you're a young player coming through, what can you do to show to the manager he can trust you, to give you the opportunity to make? Is there anything you'd recommend?
I think it's your fundamentals really. For mine was to be polite, to make sure I was there on time, to make sure I was doing my job to the very best of my ability, and to consistently do it. Those were my fundamentals in which I used my career on. And obviously, as you know, we've worked together obviously at Rovers and as a player and then as a coach. My work ethic has always been high. Listen, I was never the most talented of footballers, so I had to rely on working to my very maximum every single day until the day I retired. That's the key message I would give to any player. Be consistent in what you do. Make sure you show up on time. Make sure you're polite. Get your work done. Do your extras. That's the massive bit. Not just in training, it's the bits that you do afterwards that define where you then end up. If you're a lad that comes in and I don't know, you've done your session and you think, oh, I'm just going to get off now. That's, those little bits after the session is where you refine your skills. And that might be grabbing a coach, that might be taking a ball by yourself. Not just doing it because you think a manager needs to see it, because ultimately a manager sees it anyway. They'll find out which way or the other. But, work on your game as best as what you possibly can do with no one around you, because that's when you start to make progress. And I think if that's when you start to get the trust, when you're consistently there and doing the right things, you get trust from, well, just in normal walks of life. If you're doing that, people would trust you more than anyone else.
Welcome to the Leave No Doubt podcast. I'm so excited to welcome our new sponsors, Connection Technologies, a market leader in business-to-business tools ranging from business mobile, hosted telephony, and fixed line services. Head over to their website at www.connection-technologies.co.uk, fill in their inquiry web form and find out how Connection Technologies can support your business moving forward.
Sometimes you might be disappointed that you're not in the team, but flipping that and looking at the opportunity to maybe do more and to work on your game and to prove that you should be there.
I think it as well in terms of that is how you react to situations. I think I probably only count on a couple of hands where I've reacted poorly because I didn't want to be taken off in the game, or I wasn't selected, or I was made to travel but wasn't selected, as more so as a senior pro, because I felt my time was then, every time I made a trip or it was, and I wasn't involved, it was a game I was missing out on, because I knew at the end that the time was starting to come where I was going to start transitioning. So every game for me was vital, and I just wanted to be involved in it. So I kind of did, come away from it a little bit, but then reassessed and thought, am I setting the right example to the team? No. Am I setting the right example to young players coming through? So I think it's how you react to those situations when you are left out. That's ultimately what gains you the manager's trust as well. So they know, okay, I'm going to leave him out this time, but I know he's going to react the right way and he's going to train properly and he's going to get back in my team because he works hard and he wants to do that. It's such a big thing for a coach or a manager to look at as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's great self-awareness for players to have as well, isn't it? Actually thinking about how you react and how you're going to do it. And obviously it's from a personal, selfish point of view as well, in that, making sure that you're doing it for yourself. If they've left you out the team, you could mope around and not do the work, not do the training, and you're not going to get any benefit from doing that. But actually, working, showing that you can be trusted is going to be beneficial for you. Like, not maybe just then in that moment in time, it will be then, but also long term as well.
Yeah.
You spoke about this a minute ago. You briefly touched on the story of your career, loads of managers coming in and it maybe not going well and ending in failure. You moved to Oxford in 2005.
That's the start of the failure, yeah.
Good segue, that one, wasn't it? So you moved to Oxford in 2005, but you went there and you played a lot of games. Did you play nearly every game that season for Oxford? But ultimately, it ended in the failure. What was that moment like for you? I guess it was good to be able to get that number of games, but didn't obviously end where you liked it to.
It was kind of bittersweet, really, because that was the first full season I felt like a full-time player. Bearing in mind I'd been a pro at Luton for 4 years, and obviously apprentice for 2 of those as well. So that was the first full season. I think I played 45 games that season. I started off as a right back, and then ended up going into midfield. Brian Talbot was the manager then, and I was still living at Luton at the time, so it was a 2-hour commute in the morning to get to training. They trained, obviously we got trained at the ground and then made our way to a different facility. And coming out of that environment, which I'd known, like I said, since 11, to then go into something different was a good kick up the backside. I think I probably needed to jumpstart my career, and I was very lucky. I was given the opportunity at Oxford to go and play, and I look back on that season as a really pivotal one for me, because yes, although I played a hell of a amount of games, it ultimately ended in relegation to the conference. But the big thing for me at that time was I played 46 games. I managed to get Player of the Year in a relegated side, yeah, albeit. Do you know what I mean? So, but for me, it was kind of validation to say, yes, I am good enough to be a football league player, because I'd spent the time probably in the latter stages of my career at Luton, where I was told I wasn't good enough. I was made to feel like I wasn't good enough. So to get that opportunity at Oxford, it was a kind of, I wanted to show certain members of the staff at Luton, like, basically stick your fingers up to them and just say, listen, I've just done 46 games in League Two, and you can, obviously they'd let me go. So that was kind of a big stick your fingers up to them, and it proved to myself that I could actually do it, which was huge. And like I said, I'm that type of player that when you go, or that type of person is when you're invested into it, I invest into it properly. So it did hurt that relegation, because you don't want that on your CV. And, I've got a few there, to be honest with you now, but that was my first real. I got relegated at Luton the year I made my debut, but the one at Oxford kind of stung a little bit more, because I'd been fully involved from start to finish, and we had a huge turnover of manager. I think we started with Brian Talbot, and then Diamond Patterson come in, and then ended with Jim Smith. And then just the turnover of chairman as well. And the club was just in a very unsecure place, which kind of, whenever that happens to a club, it always ends up ultimately ending in a relegation. You look at clubs that have gone down last year, financially they're all over the shop, and there's no reason, and that's the reason why they've gone down, because they're not stable, and the club wasn't stable then. And it did hurt, and it took a bit of time. I had a bit of a falling out with Jim Smith at the time. He accused me of ducking out of a tackle, and I was fully fledged in the game, and I went back at him, and then the season had finished, and he told my agent, well, if he wants to go and find somewhere different, he can do. So, I'd signed a 2-year deal at Oxford. So I had, obviously that was my first year, and my second year then I was gearing to go back to the conference, and then he basically rang my agent and said, look, you can go and find somewhere different. We're going down a different road. And ultimately I ended up in Torquay. But for me, that validation of being able to play 40, 45 plus league games and cup games, I think it was about a 50-game season or something, was for me such a huge confidence boost, then taking me into the next stage of my career.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, from a personal side, how do you ensure that you stay, I guess, in a team that's not doing so well as a team? How do you, as a player, still keep yourself motivated to perform and to maximize what you're producing on the weekend?
I think it just goes down to my own fundamentals, really, which is to be consistent. I've always been consistent in what I do, consistent in the work ethic, consistent in the way I play the game. Didn't try and do everything. I've never been a dribbler of the football. I'm never going to be a Messi and dribble past 15 players. But I knew what I was good at, and I stuck to it. And I think that consistency, even with the turnover of managers, they can trust me to do the work and to put the work in, which is huge. And that ultimately led to me, further going on and playing 50 odd games. And like I said, that kind of work that I did as an apprentice, getting up and that work ethic and making sure all your jobs were done to the right standard, that kind of had its effect on that first season at Oxford, because, like I say, it was a make or break one for me, really. If I didn't have a great year, I would probably have found myself bouncing through non-league and ultimately out of the game in probably a couple of 2 to 3 years, which happens to a lot of players. But thankfully, I stuck with the task. Like I said, I wanted to stick a big finger up to the staff at Luton and say, you shouldn't have let me go. Had a good season. And that led on to then a really consistent spell in my career then going forward. But yeah, I'll always be indebted to it. But I just think that, being consistent in what you do is the main message that I took away from what you can take away from this, really.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's brilliant advice. I guess you've spoke about there that moved quite nicely into your period at Torquay. 8 seasons. I've got here 389 appearances.
Yeah, fair time. A fair amount of time, yeah.
Fair amount, yeah. One of my questions when I look at that and I see someone who's obviously played so many games for a club across a period of time, how did you ensure that you were always ready, always selected, always able to? I imagine you probably didn't have many injuries in that period of time. Then, like, how can you be so consistent across so many seasons playing for one team?
I think it's because I'd learnt to look after myself, which was, I just turned 24 then when I moved down to Torquay. So what Torquay is blessed with is a natural ice bath. So we utilise that. I used to utilise that a lot. After a game on Sunday morning, we'd go down to the beautiful bay down there called Barbican Bay. Me and my wife, we'd go down and have a bacon sandwich, cup of tea. I'd get into the water with the dogs, and that was kind of my recovery stage. But I just made sure I was consistently, like again, I keep going back to it, being consistent in what you do, what you eat. I had a routine. It might sound stupid, but always on a Friday night, I would have spaghetti bolognese. I would always have 2 Lucozades before a game. People will obviously say, well, it's a bit weird. But for me, that's how I approached the game. It was kind of a routine, and the routine would always be there for me, which obviously was that consistent side of it. I'd got involved in the gym. That was the first real time I got into gym work as well. So it wasn't too much in terms of lifting weights. It was more in terms of TRX had just come out, I think it was then. So we'd done a lot of suspension training, and it was kind of looking after my body that way. I knew certain aspects I know I needed it to improve in my leg strength, especially with my left foot. So I did a lot of work on that. And I think the older I got and the more games I started to play, the more I knew I needed to work on certain aspects of my body to then make sure I could play 40 to 50 and condition my body through that. And I think it worked out at probably 42, 43 games a season I played consistently at Torquay, which, is a fair amount of games in any one stint. So, I think the conditioning played a part of it. Getting in the sea was a huge beneficial aspect, no doubt about that. And also the pre-season work, we were running up hills, so we'd always work hard. So maybe I was just very lucky. But I'd like to think it was a lot of work that I put into my body and putting the right stuff into it.
Yeah, one of the bits you touched on there about, learning about your body, like learning what you needed, creating those routines is something that I always think is so important for young players coming through. And sometimes I think players get these light bulb moments where it kind of clicks and they start to realize, oh, hold on, I need to be doing this because I feel so much better doing it, and like you say there, you're talking about, I guess, quite a holistic program in that, elements of your week, you were focusing on the recovery piece. You were focusing on the injury prevention, the strength work. You had the fitness elements within your game, and how that looked for you might be different to how that looks for other players. But you found ways of, you found what your body needed at that moment in time, I guess.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point. Obviously, back then, that was obviously a lot of it was nearly 20 years ago now. Just under 20 years ago, and we still weren't given programs, if that makes sense, specific individual programs in what the players get now. It was kind of like a one cap fits all. Sorry. So in terms of like the suspension training and stuff, it was really good. It was the first time I started working on my upper body. Obviously, in terms of my cardio, I was always up there. As a running, I would always do 11 to 12k a game. Even before GPS, I was just like an Energizer bunny. I'd just keep going and going and going. But I then started to obviously utilize the top half of my body, which I never really did. Everything with me has always been legs. So I worked on that from 24. And I think it added an extra part of my game, give me a little bit more power, the ability to really tussle against the big lads in midfield, which is huge for me. I've always been one for a tackle. I'd never shy out of one. But what it gave me an added bit of muscle to push people off. But also gave me a sense of confidence as well. You look in the mirror a little bit and you start to see your chest develop, your arms are developing. It can give you that confidence then and a little bit of swagger to get on the pitch. Not just gym weights. I've never been one to do gym weights or anything like that. And we've all seen them in football clubs. But never been one for that. It's always been to obviously with the purpose of being better on the Saturday. Because the way I look at it is the week that you do, all that week from the Monday to the Friday leads up to the Saturday or the Tuesday games that you're playing. So what does that then look like through the week? What do you have to do? So you're not really going to do any form of weights or anything like that on a Friday afternoon because you're going to be sore the next day. Friday was your recovery day. So in terms of that, we were back then it was always a really hard, whatever session we had, bearing in mind we were working out of a porter cabin in the middle of Newton Abbot Racecourse at the time. So we were utilising whatever we could. I remember myself, Chris Hargreaves and Scott Bevan at the time, we'd be under the racecourse. It was like a room we had and we were using paint cans as dumbbells. That's what we had to use. And we put a broom in between it and we were shoulder pressing using paint cans and stuff. And we might laugh at it, but that's what we had to, and that's what we had then going forward. We weren't given, all this fantastic gym kit that lads have got now. It was basically stuff we could make out of and make use of, and whatever we could find personally. Doing that, we've done a lot of core work as well, which is obviously essential to especially midfield play or play in general. So that was the kind of work that we'd done. It wasn't until I actually met you, funnily enough, that I actually got given my own specific individual program for what I needed. So that was probably what 10 years later was the first time I actually got a program. So everything was kind of what we'd seen on YouTube or, other players doing it, which have been documented, and on stuff you'd learn from other players that come into the group as well. So everything was a learning day.
I think one of the things there, what I thought was really important is that not having the excuse. It's been very easy to go, well, we don't have access to a gym, so we're not going to do any of our, our strength work or conditioning work. But actually, a lot of these fundamentals, you can do it underneath the race course and with paint cans, and if that's what you need to do, you know what I mean? You don't necessarily have to have the gym. The gym may help for lots of people, but there's loads of ways you can do these same exercises if you don't have the equipment, or you can do the same, you didn't have ice bath, so you went in the sea sort of thing. Probably the sea is even better for you, but there's loads of ways you can actually make sure that you're, doing this work, the important work that we obviously understand is important these days. But even if you don't have the facilities, and also I guess we are lucky now, like you say, with the resources behind a lot of clubs have strength and conditioning coaches now, but the resources that there is online that players can go and find and learn, and about just learning what's good for your body and what works for you, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's also important that you surround yourself with the people with the same work ethic with you. So, I was really lucky down in Torquay. I had, obviously, there was Chris Hargreaves, Scotty Bevan, Chris Todd, Kevin Nicholson. There was a group of about 5 or 6 of us that would always make sure we were doing stuff after, and it wasn't just a clown around. It was beneficial to us, and that was probably led a lot by Chris, because Chris at that time was, I think when he joined, he was probably around 36. So like I said, there was a 12-year age difference between us. So we kind of looked at him, and he'd come from Plymouth, and I played with him at Oxford, so I knew what he was like. So he kind of drove that work ethic to then continue in terms of the gym. And we'd all bought into that. He was skipper at the time, so we all, us as a group, we kind of followed that. And if one was out, I don't know, ill for the day, we would continue to do that. I think also making sure that the group that you're with, or that network of teammates, share the same ethics as you as well. I think that's huge.
Yeah, and you've touched on it nicely there. My next question for you was around leadership. Obviously, you touched on Chris setting the example in those early years down at Torquay. But for yourself, being a leader on the pitch or off the pitch, what did that look like for you? As I guess in that period, or as you progress through your career?
Yeah, the word leader for me is it can be taken in whole different ways, especially in terms of football. I mean, what does a leader look like? Are you a Roy? Like, you can have different aspects of it. Are you a Roy Keane? Are you a Steven Gerrard? Are you a David Beckham? For me, it was just. It was a privilege, obviously, to be called a leader first and foremost, and it's always a privilege to captain inside, which is amazing. But I've always been a skipper, even when I was a young lad, because I'd be vocal. I'd try and lead by example and do the right things. And I think that's what a good leader does. A good leader has good morals. They'll tell people when they're not in the right, what they're doing is wrong. What you believe what they're doing is wrong, and that might be on the pitch, and more so off it. I think the word leader, like I said, you can go in so many different ways. And what does it look like? For me, just being a leader was being myself as a person. Now, if people generally think I was a leader doing that, then brilliant. But I was still the same person. I just wore an armband or didn't wear an armband. It didn't bother me whatsoever. Like I said, it's always a privilege to captain the side, but ultimately all that is a coin toss, and you do an interview when you lose. No one wants to interview the captain when they win, do they? It's when you lose that, and you've got to make sure that you're speaking the right stuff and what you're putting out there. I think there's the onus is on that as a leader, but generally as a person, if you're a good person, makes you a good leader, and people will follow good people. If you're an arsehole, sorry to use explicit words, but if you are, people aren't going to follow you. They aren't going to want to dig into the trenches with you. And that's, for me personally, that's what a good leader looks like. Is if I said to you, now, come on, we're going to go and jump over this fence. Are you going to come with me? If I was an idiot, you're going to say, nah, what are you doing that for? But if I'm going, right, come on, we're going to go and do this, and I led the way in doing it, and I'm a good person, I think 9 times out of 10, you're going to follow me over that fence, because I think that's what a good leader does. People follow him because they are good people.
And I guess it's you made a good point in there around, it's not just the person that wears that armband who's the leader. I mean, and everyone has those different leadership qualities. So like for players, thinking about what qualities they have, and what are those are that people can want to follow, or like if you are focal, that could be one of your leadership quality. If you maybe not so focal, but you lead by example, like you say, the good qualities of being a good person, obviously really important. Bristol Rovers, so really successful period in those first 2 seasons at Bristol Rovers. You got back-to-back promotions. What did that look like? Like, why was the team so successful across those 2 years? What does like the successful teams look like to you?
I'll tell you what successful teams look like, and I've been fortunate enough to get a fair few promotions along with relegations. So you can obviously you can take one from the other. A successful team is a team that gets on first and foremost, that enjoy each other's company. Like I said, the players at Rovers I still speak to now, and I've been retired, it'd be coming up to 8 years now. So a lot of those, especially the younger lads, are still playing, but I still keep in contact with every single player. And I think that's what makes a successful team. Not so much, okay, the coaching and the management was different class, but if you've got a group of players that have got a common goal and share the same outcomes and enjoy life together, and your changing room is buzzing and vibrant, and they're willing to sacrifice themselves on a Saturday for you, then you're going to have a successful side. And ultimately, that will lead to what happened, what transpired. We were always favourites in the conference to go up, so we had that huge pressure on us, especially after inheriting the relegation season that Rovers had suffered. And Rovers is a big club with a huge fan base, very passionate supporters. So that the very first 2-3 months of that was a really difficult period for the group. We had people trying to get onto the bus to get at us. I remember we played at Braintree once and we lost. We were awful, but we lost 2-0. Darryl was really close to getting the sack. We had supporters obviously trying to get through the net, and one actually punched a Braintree player. All things that a lot of us have not been used to. Bearing in mind I'd played a couple of seasons in the conference with Torquay, but never had I experienced anything like that, to be honest with you. It was quite surreal. So in terms of our mindset, it was just different class. Like, it was probably the best environment I've been really fortunate enough to work in. And just the camaraderie all through. Like I said, that group then got promoted from the conference. It then got promoted on the final day in League Two, and then finished in its highest place in League One, which was a top 10 finish, which I hadn't done. And that was the same group that went from the conference League Two, okay, with a couple of additions added in. But that's some group to be able to go and do that. And I think that just shows, if you've got a group that's willing to sacrifice for each other and get on and have the same ethics, consistently do the right things, train the right way, eat the right way, socialise the right way, it gives you a hell of a chance. And that's what we had. And like I said, I'm very fortunate enough, I could ring anyone on the phone right now and they pick up. And that's quite a rarity in football, but that's how good the group was. And like I said, a lot of them are still actually actively playing now. So try and get out to as many games as go and watch them. But yeah, it was such a fantastic group. And I think that's where I was vice captain then because Mark McChrystal was captain when I come in. And like you say, back to being a leader in that group was just making sure everyone was on the same path. And ultimately, and we were all doing the right things. There was no egos. Anyone that come into the group and had tried to come against their like basically go against the grain what we were about, they soon found themselves out. I know we had one lad that come in and he refused to wear a tie for a game, so we go to a game, shirt, tie. Darryl was a big believer of it. We'd have a suit on a match day, a home one, and he didn't want to wear a tie. Obviously, we took umbrage to that. Everyone wears a tie. He turned up, didn't wear a tie, was gone on Monday morning. And that wasn't just Darryl's power. That was also players' power as well, because if we're meant to be, if he wants us to do this, we all do this. It's a one in, all in situation. If you come away from it, then you're no good to us, and you're not going to be on our journey then going forward, because what you'll then do is we can't trust you to put a tie on. We can't trust you to make a tackle in the 87th minute. It might sound a bit silly, but that's the kind of bond that we had as a group, and it was just amazing.
It's brilliant, when the amount of time you talk to people about successful teams, and obviously, you've got to have talented players and talented squads, but, how much of it comes down to the actual group and how strong the group is together. And I guess you can't get away from that when you're playing in a team sport. So, those relationships, it just shows the power of those relationships within the teams that you're playing within. And the culture that you set and stick to, that you're speaking about there.
Yeah, I think the culture is another thing. The culture we had at that was amazing, and that did come a lot from Darryl. Obviously, you've worked with him yourself, and he can be a bit up and down at times. But the culture that he set he was quite laid back, but also very demanding. I know it kind of contradicts itself a little bit, but if we were in and around that changing environment, it was fun. Everything was, we'd have a laugh and a joke. That Ellis was probably the biggest practical joker out of everyone in the group. But the moment we stepped out and started doing the warm up, everything was then switched on to the very moment that we then finished training and we go back to being mates again, messing around. And that was a key component, I think, from Darryl that put in that. Like I said, the culture outside of the changing room was fixed on and fixated on being the very best we could possibly be. Like, if you look at our group wasn't a talented, you would never say our group was going to go, there was going to be players that probably would play in the Premier League, and the Locks being the exception, and obviously Billy Bowden then making obviously his international debut as well. But that was one from a group of 20 plus players. The rest were all good at what they did. We just made each other better because we got on with each other, if that makes sense. And we always had each other's back. And that's a rarity these days. And like I said, I think that stemmed from the culture that Darryl had. You did mess around where you can have your laugh and a joke before training, but once you train and you train to your very maximum, and then you come back off it. Same as with the gym. I mean, you'd taken the gym for 2-3 years when we were there working together. Very rarely were lads messing around in the gym, if ever. They would go in, do their work diligently, because you knew it had a beneficial effect and had a huge effect on what the Saturday looked like. And that was the culture that Darryl had created. And I think that was really good. But then the players have to buy into it, and you have to buy into it as a person as well. And that ultimately led to a successful team.
No, I mean, that's brilliant. That's brilliant insight. And, I think there's so much things, and I'm just thinking back to my time there. And I think, like as a staff member, it was probably the most fun that I had working within sport. I've been part of successful teams, but that one was really fun, and that was the culture that was set. But you're right, it was fun when you're on these we had fun on these long journeys up to Accrington, Stanley away. The ones where you're thinking as a staff member, oh, that's a drag, I don't really want to do it. But then when you needed to switch on, you switched on. So I think that's testament maybe to Darryl and that period of time and the culture that was built, because it was built before I guess I turned up there. I turned up when you guys had already made it to League One, but the culture was what was embedded already within the club. I'm just conscious of I'm conscious of the time here. And one thing I really wanted to get onto is your role at the moment working with the PFA, and how important that is, as an association, and what you do on a day to day, or what you can provide. You're able to share a little bit around what the PFA, your role is with the PFA, and how that supports players.
Yeah, so now my new role is obviously I'm a player service executive at the PFA. So what that ensures is obviously I'll go into clubs, do presentations based on what the union can offer the players, and that's it's going in, and that might be signposting different avenues for players that they show an interest in. So I might go and use Bristol Rovers as an example because I've got a meeting with them coming up. So I'll go in and do the presentation on them. I'll talk about the benefits that they get. Obviously, big topics are the boot vouchers and the pension money they receive, but also talking to them about the business school, the coaching courses, which I did myself through that. Obviously, after retiring, went into coaching, and then the vast majority of my work is to deal with disciplinaries. So that might be between clubs. It's representing players at these disciplinaries. So that might be anything from betting to doping to club disputes between players, all types of different work, which is really good. And like I said, no day is ever the same. There's always something different. So nothing is monotonous. It's exciting. I've been very fortunate. I went off to Hong Kong for a week, part of a Masters tournament where we took 10 former members out, and they played in a tournament representing the PFA in that. So obviously I was along with that, and that was great. It was a fantastic experience, and to see a different culture as well. Somewhere probably I would never have envisioned going on holiday or anything like that, and I found myself there was work, which was brilliant. And also we do a lot of stuff with youth advisory service, which is from 6 to 16 academy to where the PFA have a youth advisory service. So anyone who's in an academy at this moment in time and doesn't have always being taught to, but agents are talking to them. We're there as a service that can provide and give help and guidance and advice to those young players or parents then coming through. And also the same with under 18s, 21s, and going into first team as well. So, like I said, the PFA as a whole is a huge organisation built solely to help players, both male and female.
Yeah, and something that players really should be looking at, accessing. There's, like you're talking about there's loads of things, I think, as young players or players within the game that you might not have the answers for, or maybe you're getting advice from outside of you, but you've got an organization there that's purely there, I guess, to support you in those situations and to give you advice and support. So definitely something that's really important for players to be aware of.
Yeah, like I said, I'm very, very fortunate that I've managed to have a long and let's say successful career, but because to stay in football ultimately as a player for 17 years is a successful career. It doesn't define. I knew from an early stage I was never going to make a vast amount of money. I knew I would always have to work afterwards, but my aim was to always stay in and around football for physically as long as possible. So to get this opportunity to still work in the game but outside of the game, if that makes sense, is such a privilege. And also to help and nurture and guide especially young players then coming through. I wish the wellbeing service had been on offer when I retired. I really struggled when I retired. I got depressed, went into a spate of depression as well. And it's been talked about before, and I'm open and honest enough to go and recall my story about that to people and say, especially when you retire, because you go from a club like Bristol Rovers, or whatever club you're at, and you're there and you're very successful. Like I had a very successful spell there, and you're kind of a hero. You put on that pedestal, and then I saw obviously then retiring and going into normality, so should we say, in terms of the coaching aspect. I went from a hero to zero very fast, and it was something that I kind of needed to speak to. So now we've got the wellbeing service in place and that. So if any player is struggling mentally, any player that retires, we make sure we get in contact with them, and we're regularly in contact with them just to make sure that they're okay then doing that. There's also the brain health as well. So I've just had a brain map. So it's a clinical trial that we're doing at the moment to see the link between obviously CTE and football. Obviously, a good friend of ours, Marcus Stewart, has obviously been diagnosed with MND. Does heading of football have a link to that at all or anything like that? So there's all these clinical trials that are going through. So that all these retired players and players over 35, we're getting in contact with them for try and put them into that. So that's a new service that's come into play. Like I said, I wish I'd have had or known about these services, and that's part of my role, is to make players aware of these services and the benefits that the PFA. It's not just about boot vouchers and pension. There's a hell of a lot of stuff that goes under the radar, which needs to be talked about a hell of a lot more. So, like I said, it's a real privilege to go into clubs and to talk about that to players and make them aware of the benefits of and what they can get. Just not as a member, as a current member. We also look after former members. So it's players that are playing non-league or at 50 years age, like I need a knee operation. So the PFA have an access fund there. So I've got a £12,000 lifetime allowance. So if I have anything medical wise that I'm struggling to pay for, the PFA will then help me with a grant then to either fully subsidise it or part subsidise it as well. So there are all these different aspects that kind of go under the radar, but people need to be aware of it. So, like I said, the club visits for me are such a huge privilege, and to be part of helping people out for the past 9 months has been really rewarding.
That's brilliant. I think that's a nice way to to finish the podcast off. I just wanted to thank once again our sponsors, Connection Technologies, and Lee. Thank you for speaking to us.
No, it's been a pleasure, mate. Really enjoyed it. It's like therapy.
Thanks, Lee.